Wait, can I cut in for a second?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I have a random question I want to ask, starting with Stephen and then going around. What do you think should be people's most pressing issue? Not what it currently is, but what do you think is a cause that people should really focus more and care about more in the United States that they don't do right now?
Rule of law and democracy.
You don't think people care about democracy here enough?
No.
Do you think that because of the Trumpsters, or do you think like...
I think nobody does. I think when leftists talk about packing the courts, I think when Trump people talk about not having insurrections or having justified insurrections, yeah, I think it's all redonkulous. I think people have a really hard time when other people they don't like win, and they try to like institutionally make that impossible. And I think in some ways it's really bad, in other ways I'm more sympathetic, but...
Yeah. I guess I just want to push back a little bit because I'm not saying this is right or agree, but the argument that I've heard some people say about packing the courts is because they believe the courts are currently undemocratic or one of the most undemocratic institutions. And basically it was because of congressional, like, I think filibustering is the right word, I don't know, but that basically Trump got, I think, 1 or 2 more nominees onto the court than he was supposed to.
One more, probably.
They blocked Merrick Garland.
Yeah, they blocked Merrick Garland.
But I don't know if I would say that was necessarily undemocratic. It gets a little bit complicated. I mean, the Supreme Court is democratic in that the appointees come from the elected president, and the Merrick Garland block was kind of democratic in that the Senate sort of had a mandate from the people to be undemocratic by blocking that appointment. It's kind of complicated. I think that reforms to the Supreme Court are okay. I really liked the idea of was it every 20 years or something, or 24 years or something, you force a Supreme Court justice to retire?
Yeah,
basically what it does is it made it so that every single president would get the exact same amount of Supreme Court picks because you're rotating basically the retirements. It's not like a lifetime appointed thing. But regardless, I think you can argue there's an issue with the structure of the Supreme Court, or at least like the unfairness of the appointments, but to say that the solution to that then is to just add like 30 more justices is kind of silly.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about you, Loner?
By the way, I do just want to throw out there, FDR had like a majority, and he wasn't able to pack the courts in the fallout of the Great Depression. So not only is there a question about whether or not it's the right move, there's also a question about just the practicality of achieving something like that.
Yeah, that's valid. I think, I don't know if this is the right phrase for it. I think that there is something going on in America. Basically simplification is very seductive in a way. Being able to say, oh, yeah, screw Europe. Well, why do we have to care about Ukraine? Why do we, I think people are maybe naturally even intuitively inclined towards that. And we see this in local domestic policy issues too. Or I guess this is also kind of international. Build the wall, lock her up. Just simple phrases, I think, are really make people inclined to them. So I guess my question to you guys is how do we fight against, I don't say human nature, but this human inclinivity, I can't pronounce that word.
Inclination?
Inclination, yes. To want to simplify things to such an extent that we suddenly lose the nuances that are really important for policy making and basically policy building. I don't know if there's an answer.
It's a question about marketing. It's trying to find simple explanations for extremely complex problems, and sometimes those just don't exist. And on some issues, if you're a scam artist or a con man and you're willing to put on a better show with more lights and bells and whistles, you will have an advantage from a market standpoint, from marketability, to somebody who is an expert who knows what they're talking about, but they're going to have to give you a somewhat unsatisfactory answer because not everything has a super 100% satisfactory solution. And so the question is, in my opinion, what I like to do is just attempt to the best of your ability to embarrass those con men, to show them to be con men, to expose them as con men, and prop up experts who know what they're talking about.
So you don't think there should be a progressive, almost populist response, the progressives should come up with their ridiculous 3-word cat sound bites and shit like that?
If I read a complicated Thomas Schelling book, some IR book that talks about all these theories and stuff, if I can simplify these theories to a chess game or to a checker game, as he has done in his books, that's great. But some situations are just not going to be possible for that, and I think I'd rather accept that and try to explain the situation and show the other people to be con artists, then degrade myself and misrepresent something like IR, which could then have negative effects down the line. If I misrepresent a certain defense policy, if I misrepresent nuclear brinksmanship to people in order to try to explain the type of risk-taking behavior and the percentages of risk that nation states are willing to put themselves under in these situations, then that could lead to real problems down the line where they're making incorrect decisions about something that really determines the future of everyone.
When you said something about how the left don't care that much about democracy, I think I because when I say that about Republicans and their complacency about what Trump does and how much they're willing to sacrifice in terms of democratic values to get their way, I can totally see how progressives would do that to the same degree if they had the chance to. Because I noticed when the Queen died in the UK, the debates that followed that were very much left-wing people saying she could have done more with her power, right? And then you just ask a few questions and you can basically get them quite easily into a position of admitting that they would basically be okay with a dictatorship, right? Like, would you be okay if the Queen did this policy arbitrarily? Yeah. What about this one? What about this one? And then suddenly you've just got like someone accepting a dictator. But how would you compare those threats in the US, like Republicans and left-wingers for being threats to democracy in the US?
I feel like we need to spend more time appreciating the system that we have. The system that we have, rather than the different like political ideologies that are fighting for power in the state. Because I think right now people have basically completely and totally neglected the system. Like, they don't know how it works. They have no appreciation for it. And instead it's just, what tools can we use to enact whatever policy we want? Kind of like you said, I think that people would act like being an authoritative dictator was a bad thing, but if they're passing the policies that you want, I think people would largely be okay with that, which is a little bit frustrating.
What do you think is the biggest like misconception with how the U.S. government works? Like, what do you think is the one that people just don't get, don't understand, guess wrong, whatever?
Our institutions are largely effective. They're largely a reflection of the people right now, who are historically divided amongst themselves, and I think that's why there's a lot of gridlock and a lot of stuff that doesn't seem to be working that well. But yeah.
I think 3 branches. The amount of times I've had to hear Americans blame Biden for Roe v. Wade is just insane. I can't, yeah. Progressive commentators would use that. Or saying that like Obama could have codified Roe v. Wade, even though I don't think he ever had that supermajority to do it. So, yeah.